It's been a tough week for Gojo fans. The leaks for chapter 236 confirms that Akutami has actually killed off the former strongest in the world. Gojo vs Sukuna was not only to determine who was the strongest in the world, but the strongest in history in the Jujutsu Kaisen world. Essentially, it's the battle of the goats with these two. And in the latest episode of Jujutsu Kaisen, we see why a lot of us considered Gojo the GOAT for such a long time during this series. The guy was at his absolute peak in this episode. We saw what he can actually achieve when he's taking things seriously, but we also saw how lonely the guy really is. That saying of "it's lonely at the top" fits perfectly for Gojo. At this point in the story, he was the strongest, which means he was at the top of the Jujutsu world, but there's a lot of inner turmoil there within Gojo, as we saw in the leaks with this week's chapter and in this episode. The episode this week covers chapters 88, 89, and 90, which is centered around the fight with Gojo versus Hanami, Chozo, and Jogo. But what I really liked, and I think because this week's chapter had Gojo getting killed by Sukuna, at the beginning of the episode, they had a little tribute towards Gojo. The screen was a lot smaller, like an old 4x3 screen. We had all the characters just talk about Gojo, him being a sensei, a friend, an idiot, and in the words of Yuji, the strongest. And I swear, there was a part of me that thought we were gonna get an "in memory of Satoru Gojo" message after all the characters shared their tribute to Gojo. And I'll give him my own tribute and praise shortly, but seeing how Gojo broke down his guard when he saw Geto for a full minute, which was the requirement for the prison realm, just shows how much he valued Geto as a friend. This happens again in the chapter released this week. Gojo wished Geto was there motivating him against Sukuna. And in this episode, when Kenjaku made his reveal, all the memories with Gojo and Geto being friends come flooding back to Gojo, and released a video a few months back explaining the tragedy of Geto, which, to summarize, it's basically describing how Geto's naive look on the world and his pure ideals got corrupted by seeing the evil of humanity, which takes him down a dark, self-destructive path of no return, which eventually leads to him getting killed by his former best friend. But the biggest tragedy regarding Geto, in my opinion, was the fact that he was genuinely a good guy, but he got traumatized by Toji, and with the death of Riko, that it changed him forever. With Gojo, the biggest tragedy for me, in my opinion, is that he is the strongest. The day he was born, he had a target on his back. No matter what happens, Gojo is the guy that the villains had to get rid of. Toji had to see Gojo for himself when he was just a kid. In fact, I would say the reason why Toji even took up the mission to kill Riko in the first place was for him to get a chance to kill Gojo, as he himself admitted that killing Gojo was like a prize for him. Look at Geto back in episode 5 of this current season. He is questioning Gojo's beliefs and inner character because of his strength. Almost everything related to Jujutsu has a link back to Gojo in some way, and somehow there's always a target on his back. The guy just being alive is almost a curse for him. The higher-ups have always had an agenda against Gojo, and to be fair, he does bite back at them, but it's always been a conversation on how to keep Gojo under control within the higher-ups. Every time Kenjaku hatched a plan, it's always centered around Gojo. The barrier blocking Gojo from entering Jujutsu High in the Goodwill event arc, that barrier was specifically made for Gojo. In this very episode, the whole plan with the prison realm was made solely for Gojo. Toji hatching a plan to make sure Gojo gets tired by having him protect Riko with assassins on the loose and making him use his 6 eyes and limitless for literally 24 hours. Sukuna wanted to use the 10 shadows for Gojo. This was hinted all the way back from episode 5 of the first season. Sukuna saying Gojo will be the first person he kills as soon as he takes over Yuji's body. Oji, Kenjaku and his special grade curses, Sukuna being the king of all curses, and even the higher-ups in the Jujutsu world all have one common enemy, and that is Gojo. Not anyone else, but him and him alone. But this is one of the tragedies of him being the strongest, and it really dawned on me just by watching this episode. I don't know about you guys, but Gojo looked like a broken man in this episode. It's like that full swagger he had whenever he rolled up to beat the shit out of everyone wasn't really there, such as when you compare him to episode 20 of the first season of Jujutsu Kaisen, when he rolled up and we had the hollow purple theme playing. He was confident, charismatic, and had that it factor. He was the guy whenever he turned up to show everyone that he is the strongest. But in this episode, he didn't really have that. He looked really stressed, and I get that was the whole point of Kenjaku's plan. But there wasn't any scenes of him just playing around with his opponents like how he usually does. And then when he saw Kenjaku inside of Geto's body, that was the moment that fully broke him. From what I have seen in this series, Gojo is the only one who always fights alone in this series. We have seen plenty of times that the Jujutsu sorcerers always gang up against the cursed spirits, but whenever Gojo has had a fight in this series, he has always been alone. Now go to the Gojo past arc. You see himself and Geto always working together, either fighting together or coming up with a plan to get the upper hand. But now Geto is no more, and you don't see Gojo making plans or fighting with any other sorcerers. It's not a coincidence that after Geto became evil, Gojo stopped fighting with the other sorcerers, and it goes back to the tragedy of him being the strongest. He is so strong and godly, and yet he couldn't save Geto. Now, obviously he knows he is the main target for the villain, so he would rather not have any of the Jujutsu sorcerers with him, as they might be in danger if they are with him, and he won't be able to use his full strength to protect them. As we saw in this episode where he couldn't use Infinity Void for too long, or at its full power, because of the normal civilians within the vicinity, or even against Sukuna. It was just him turning up with the others looking on from a different location. However, I think emotionally, he doesn't want to get close and be friends with anyone like how he was with Geto. We can see from this episode and chapter 236 how much of a void Geto left in Gojo's life, so him losing another person to darkness will be too much for him emotionally, because if they do end up becoming a strong antagonist, then it will be up to Gojo to kill them. Basically, Gojo doesn't want a Geto 2.0, and you can understand why. He killed his best friend after seeing how much of a downward spiral Geto has lived ever since the Gojo past arc. This is what happens when you are the strongest. You alone will be everyone's target, and you alone will have to walk a path of solitude because you are the strongest. Now, despite me saying Gojo doesn't have that same swagger compared to some of his previous moments in battle, Gojo was still so awesome, man. The scene where he killed 1,000 transfigured humans within 299 seconds, absolute insanity. The scene where he killed Hanami with his infinity was brutal. It's like he used his infinity to suffocate Hanami into exploding. The look on Gojo's face was Sukuna-esque. Whenever we see Sukuna smile like a madman, they actually made Gojo look like a villain in this episode. There was the scene where Jogo was running away, and it seemed like the background music had a violin playing in the background. But it was this sinister music being played, and it was with Jogo running away with Gojo going after him. I swear that scene made it seem like Gojo was the boogeyman going after his victims. But not only was Gojo badass in this episode with his ruthlessness, he was also a hero. He could have used Infinity Void to its max and killed Chozo and Jogo and end the whole Shibuya incident arc right there. But he knew that the innocent civilians would also die along with the cursed spirits. Gojo in his early days wouldn't have hesitated in doing that, but the Gojo we see now has a lot more humanity. Even if he struggles himself, he won't put the lives of the civilians ahead of his own. He even says sorry that he won't be able to save everyone. The argument that ended the friendship between Gojo and Geto in chapter 78 and episode 5 of season 2 was Geto killing people without reason. Gojo made a serious argument and mentioned to Geto that he himself has said that pointless killing is useless. You can make the argument here for this episode that if Gojo did use Infinity Void longer and to its maximum, which would have killed both the innocent civilians and the transfigured humans, but also the cursed spirits, the ends justify the means argument basically, and according to Gojo himself, pointless killing is useless. But killing the people in the train station in that specific floor, which will lead to the deaths of Jogo and Chozo, is that still a pointless killing? Because you can say if Gojo did use his full strength and killed all the normal people along with Jogo and Chozo, wouldn't that be worth it? Wouldn't that then stop a bigger massacre occurring later on? And guess what? a bigger massacre did happen when Jogo fed Yuji 10 more fingers of Sukuna, which resulted in Sukuna killing so many people in Shibuya. But Gojo still never took that chance, even though you can see killing the normal people wouldn't just be a pointless killing. He would have saved everyone else an even bigger tragedy later in the arc. This shows to us that Gojo really isn't as cold as Mahito claimed he was. Gojo will kill, like he has no objections to getting his hands dirty, but he will never kill the innocent. He would make sure he protects them. Even in this episode when he used Infinity Void, he only went after the transfigured humans. He could have gone after Jogo and Chozo, but he decided to kill the 1,000 transfigured humans instead, which is him living up to the words spoken by Geto back in chapter 65. Jujutsu exists to protect non-Jujutsu sorcerers. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts on the week Gojo has had. You Gojo fans, comment below your best Gojo moments. They don't have to be the big epic fight moments. They can even be the comedy moments as well. And as I always say, don't forget to subscribe to the Shaman Tribe.